Pray. Loving God, please take my words and anoint them by your Holy Spirit, and our hearts and minds also, that we might receive from you today your living word for each of us, for your church and for your world. For we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. Well now, this is a first for me on so many levels. This is my first Palm Sunday at St. Laurence. And it's the first time that I'm doing a Palm Sunday without doing the Passion narrative at the end of the service. So this is a bit of a first for me because normally we have we begin with the Palm Sunday, but we kind of bring in the Passion narratives. But it means that at St. Laurence you faithfully follow every day of Holy Week. I'm joking. I'm just saying that's my assumption, people, because otherwise we end up moving from one celebration to another Sunday celebration without having gone through the difficult times. And this is one of the things that I just want to kind of preface this with. Partly because I had the privilege of spending time at the women's retreat. Some of you were also there. But also just in general in these last few weeks, different conversations I've had with different ones of you. And there is a natural desire to avoid sadness. That somehow we kind of just push it to the side. And yet we know, don't we, that actually our lives are a mixture of joy and sadness. And that we can't one is needed with the other. And this is where I go, and I've mentioned it to many of you already in the last couple of weeks. I go to my great theological resource, which is the movie called Inside Out. Which is an animated movie. How many of you have seen it? Okay, good. There's a smattering of you who have seen it. It's a great insight into human psychology, into human psyche. And the first movie, it's now got its second one, but this is the first one I'm talking about. In there's this deep aversion to being sad. And they try and avoid sadness at all costs. And towards the end of the movie, they realize that in order to fully experience joy, you need also to experience sadness. And so I kind of say that to you to preface the beginning of Holy Week. For me, going through the daily structure of Holy Week has been one of the most transformative tools that God has used in my own life. And it's brought me so many unexpected benefits and things that I never imagined would happen. It's those unexpected graces that God shows. And I would really encourage you to think about taking part in different parts of Holy Week, to the extent you can. But I also want you to kind of think about some of the discomforts that go with it. Now, for those of you who can't get out of bed in the morning, you have morning prayer live stream, so nobody gets to see what you look like. So you can be in bed, or you can be up with your morning face, or whatever else that might look like, but you can still participate in morning prayer, which is every day this week at 8 o'clock on YouTube and Facebook. And who doesn't want to start their day with me going bright and perky in the morning, right? And what I'm going to be offering is both a reflection and prayers for the day as we move through Holy Week, but also inspired by this women's retreat, I'm also going to offer every day a daily prompt for those of you who'd like to journal or would like to paint or draw or sketch or reflect on something. So not only will you get the scriptures, not only will you get the prayers for the day, but you're also going to get a prompt for the day as well. I mean, is there no end to St. Lawrence's largesse, really? And so we have that every day through Monday through to Saturday of Holy Week. And then on Monday, Thursday, there's a soup supper at 6, which is in the hall. And then we're in here for Monday, Thursday service at 7. And yes, there will be foot washing available. And yes, you might be thinking, I'm not doing that. But I'm also going to ask you to reflect on this in preparation. I'd want everybody to come, right? So if you can't do foot washing, that's fine. But I want you to take a moment just to ponder this. The foot washing is uncomfortable because you're letting somebody else see your foot in all of its nakedness. You're allowing somebody else to pour water on it and to wash it and to dry it and all of those things. And it's uncomfortable, it's weird, it feels just strange. Every time I move my head, it clicks. That's not good, is it? And so that's uncomfortable. But for the disciples, it was equally uncomfortable. Think about it. Jesus was washing their feet of dirtier feet than you'll ever have. I'll just say that. Open-toed sandals on biblical paths, which are full of... Anyway, just leave that one there. And so we see that. So Jesus made those disciples feel uncomfortable. But in that, he also taught them a grace and an example. And I really encourage you to reflect about whether you can this year maybe turn up for Maundy Thursday if that's new for you, or maybe it'll be to allow someone else to wash your feet. And I just want to give you that as an offering. And then, of course, we have Good Friday, and then we have the Easter celebration. So I just want you to think about maybe your Lenten practice this year is to take part in the Holy Week in a new way. And I really want to encourage you to reflect on that as well. This isn't going to go well if I can't move. I'll just be honest. This is not really... Anyway, we'll do the best we can. Apologies for that. And the next thing I want to do now, how many of you are history buffs? There was somebody put their hand up there. We'll write down really quickly. I'm not going to pick on you. It's okay. But what I'm reminded of here takes me back two images that we have from our readings today. Take me back to Elizabethan England. Elizabeth I, specifically. Anybody ever heard of her? Yeah. Okay. So she was until Queen Elizabeth rocked up. She was the longest-serving monarch of England, and she had a terribly traumatic childhood, if anybody knows anything about her situation. Now, I can't go into all of the detail of it, but suffice it to say, she was delegitimized by her father because she was a girl, and so she was declared illegitimate. And then her half-sister eventually becomes queen, and she's always got the death warrant sitting beside her to execute Elizabeth. And she never quite signs it, but she has it and it's hanging over her all the time. And yes, Elizabeth ends up in the Tower of London. So she had a pretty traumatic kind of like growing up period. Dysfunctional families, again, as we've talked about before, and all of that. But there came a moment when she was under house arrest in a quite a nice country residence, and then she sees these horses riding towards her. And she's out riding, and this is obviously what is laid down as being history. Whether it's true or not is a different matter. But she doesn't know if these soldiers are coming to arrest her, to take her back to the Tower of London, or what. And she's scared in that moment, because she doesn't know, and she prepares herself, and she does steel herself up for what comes next. And it is to tell her, if you can imagine it, the soldiers get off their horses and they kneel before her because she has become queen. And sometimes we don't know about just how thin these kind of moments are. But in that moment, she quotes from the psalm that was sung today. And she would have said this with such meaning, I think, because she says this is God's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. And so she begins the royal progress to London with all of the cavalcade that Tudor England would have thrown at that, which was literally everything was moved. Clocks, tableware, tables, silverware, everything would all be moved. And so she would go in great procession, and everywhere she stayed on her way to London, there would be like a great fanfare and all the rest of it. And then suddenly she arrives in London to great acclaim, and this time she comes not to the Tower of London, but as queen. What a turnaround in that situation. It's pretty evocative imagery, isn't it? It's pretty powerful stuff. And so that's the first image that we have from Elizabethan England. The second one is to do with robes. And some of you may know this, that this is, whether this happened again, we don't know, but there was a guy who had a colourful kind of career called Sir Walter Raleigh. Sir Walter Raleigh. And Sir Walter Raleigh, seeing the Queen was about to be stepping out onto a puddle, takes off his cloak and puts it down so she can step on his cloak rather than stepping on the wet puddle. And so we have that famous illustration as well. Robes have always been associated, the taking off of a robe and putting it down, have always been associated with kingship. And so in the passage we have in Luke, it's all about kingship. And you'll see not a single reference to a palm branch anywhere in that gospel reading. But it is about the robes and the cloaks instead. And so they are the symbol of submitting to royal authority and sovereignty. But we don't begin there. We begin in Zechariah, 2,500 years from where we are now, back to 2,500 years ago, when things were very bleak for the people of Jerusalem and in that surrounding area. At the time Zechariah is writing, which is about 500 years before Jesus is born, Zechariah is speaking about something beautiful, but that has been unknown in living memory. For the last 100 years, there has been no king in Jerusalem. Instead, it has been the forces of empire that have occupied. The last king that ruled in Jerusalem had been carted off by the Babylonians, I think, and died in captivity. Zedekiah, that's right, Zedekiah was the king. And he was carried off, and that was the end of the Davidic, the line of David. That was the end of that lineage and it's the end of, almost it felt like the extinguishing of hope. And in that moment, they found themselves hearing these words, which would have sounded so strange, but also so beautiful. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter Jerusalem. Lo, your king comes to you. Triumphant and victorious is he. But they haven't had a king. But this is looking forward to a time when a true king would come again. It reminds me a lot about those of you who know C.S. Lewis and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and the Chronicles of Narnia and the prophecies that are fulfilled over time. C.S. Lewis was a Christian layperson, an Oxford academic, and he wrote he wrote the Chronicles of Narnia to kind of like explain and expand on Christian themes. But here we have, lo, your king comes to you. Triumphant and victorious is he. Now the thing is that just like Elizabeth entered into the city of London to great fanfare and acclaim, and there would have been a procession to have gone with it, I notice now that the procession that goes ahead of the President of the United States seems to be an interminable like cavalcade of cars. It's endless. It's something like 40 to 50 cars in his cavalcade, because he has to have an ambulance and he has to have security detail. And I don't know, honestly, what all those other cars are for. I don't know if they've just got his packed lunch or something. I don't know. But whatever. But I think it's partly that it's just to kind of show this is the President of the United States is arriving and whatever. And so they come with all of these flashing lights and all that sort of stuff. Back in the Roman times, they had again a similar kind of system and structure, which was they were conquerors, right? That what they did was they did lots of military campaigns. And when a military commander was successful, he would receive the honor of Rome on his return. The honor of Rome was that he would be arriving in as the conquering hero with a great procession and fanfares and all the rest of it. And the crowds would come along and they would cheer, yay! Okay. That's what happens. So what people would expect from somebody who is triumphant and victorious, whether it be the Babylonian Empire, whether it be the Roman Empire, or whether it be Queen Elizabeth I, or the President of the United States with his cavalcade of cars, or whatever they are, what do we see here? It says, lo, your king comes to you. And you imagine The king coming when it's like fancy charger. The conquering hero in Rome always came a huge like horse, which had a like gold cloth underneath the saddle, and he's like this, you know, waving and receiving the applause of everybody, going lots of stuff. Okay. For those of you online, I'm sorry. So, if I don't breathe, it helps. Okay. But what we see now is the contrast, and this, I want you to feel the exchange, the difference here. We're still back in 2,500 years ago from now. We're still talking about, triumphant people. We're still talking about Babylonian Empire at this point, but we're talking about empires showing off their power and authority in every way possible with their fancy horses and their chariots and all of that kind of stuff. And here is how the great king, victorious, enters into his promised city, humble and riding on a donkey. Go further. It's not a charger, which is the big horse. It's not a horse. It's not a donkey. It's a colt. You're talking about the lowest thing that you can come on in on. And that is what this victorious king is coming on a colt. Not even a donkey, not even a horse, let alone a charger, coming in. This is how the promised Messiah comes, is on the back of a colt, the foal of a donkey, the least of the least of the least. Barely able to take the weight of Jesus, but does so. And so that's the first thing we kind of need to get, is there is something different. When Jesus talks about the fact that his kingdom is different to what's gone before, he's doing it with good biblical precedent. Because the biblical narrative anticipates the kind of king that was to come. One who did not come with all of the fancy stuff, but instead chose not to. And that's what Philippians speaks of. I'm not going to go into Philippians because if you haven't noticed, that reading might have sounded oddly familiar to you because we've been using that as our affirmation of faith throughout the whole of Lent, quite deliberately. It was one that was introduced 20-something years ago now as an authorized affirmation of faith, and it's one that's very appropriate for the season of Lent. So that's why that is included there. You'll be hearing it a little bit in a moment. But the point is, the nature and kind of kingship that Jesus says, Paul talks about the fact that since he was God, he didn't choose to have equality with God, but chose instead to be self-emptying. This is the nature of the God to whom we serve. And that's important because the next verse says, is something else that flows from this, which again speaks to our world today. The nature of this kingship. Not only is it humble, but what it brings in is different. He will cut off the chariot from Ephraim. A chariot was a war thing. The war horse from Jerusalem, that's pretty self-explanatory, and the battle bow shall be cut off. The instruments of warfare will be destroyed. That's what that means. And then the next bit is so very important in our today's world because this has been weaponized, particularly in recent years, to do with the Middle East situation. And I want just to kind of like unpick this because it's so very important. Some of you will be aware that that this whole situation we're in the Middle East right now, the refrain, which is from sea to sea or from the river to the sea, depending on who you are, whichever community it is, has been weaponized. And it's been weaponized to talk about exactly what God is not talking about. Because what they were talking about is what current people are doing is they are taking by force. They are taking by military might. They are taking with the tools of war and conflict, the very things that God says we need to get rid of. And instead what he says is, he shall command peace to the nations. His dominion, again, deliberately taking imperial language and turning it on its end. His dominion shall be from sea to sea and from the river to the ends of the earth. But go back to that first line, it was, he shall command peace to the nations. Not conflict, not violence, not a determination to exterminate the other people that are sharing this land. Do you see what I mean? And yet that's been weaponized as an excuse for violence, which has no place in the schemes of God in that way. So that's just to kind of like put that one out there and smoke it. So that's that one. I now want to talk about the gospel reading just very briefly. When Jesus was coming in on a colt of a donkey, and people and his disciples were starting to get excited and starting to cheer, and as they got closer to the city, more people joined in and they started cheering, and then more people started cheering and people started cheering. Then suddenly folk thought to themselves, at last, God's promised Messiah has come to Jerusalem to be king. And the crowds went wild. When they saw Jesus coming, when they saw Jesus coming, they immediately thought back to that passage in Zechariah. And they said, blessed is the one who comes in the name of blessed is the king, is how Luke talks about it. Blessed is the king who comes in the name of the Lord. And so that's because this is about emphasizing the kingship. The Gospel of Luke focuses on the kingship of Jesus. And so that's why kingly language is being used here. That's also why the robes are being used, not the palm branches, because the robes have a very explicit royal connotation to them. So that's why that's being used. Anyway, my point is that they knew that's what was coming on. What they weren't prepared for is what comes next. What they wanted from Jesus, what they expected from God, was that Jesus would rock up to Pilate's palace and go, "Oi, you, take your people and go." He didn't do that. He did something else. But that's for Holy Week. So I'll come back to that on another occasion. But Jesus comes to clean up house in his own community, not trying to overthrow the Roman Empire. And that then caused this kind of like complete turnaround, where the people who had cheered with palm branches, expecting Jesus to overcome the Roman Empire, by the end of the week, they are wanting him going to the Roman emperor, Pilate, the Roman emperor's representative, to ask, to plead, to cry out for this very same person to be crucified, which is, of course, the Roman system of execution. The move from cheering him in, hoping he would overthrow the Roman Empire, to within days wanting him to be crucified by that same Roman Empire, should not be lost on any of us. But that will be to be explored each day of Holy Week as we go through it, day by day by day. And in the Gospel of Luke, what you will find emphasized isn't just the kingship of Jesus, but in the kind of the build-up to Good Friday, is also the isolation of Jesus, how he is increasingly on his own. And so, as we journey towards Good Friday, as we look with hope to Easter Day, the great subversion of all that is wrong in the world, we are called to do something new in our world today, to be a prophetic community that embodies the life of Christ. The Gospel also speaks, and I'm concluding with this, don't worry, the Gospel also speaks about the works of power that Jesus did. Think about what those were. healing people who were sick, reconciling people who'd been marginalized, bringing hope to the hopeless, sitting with people who had been stigmatized and rejected by respectable society, and bringing them in to the purposes of God's love, the inclusive, radically inclusive love of God. And we are called in this day and in this world to do exactly the same. So the question is, how will you respond? That is for us to work through this Holy Week. Amen.